Welcome to D&I One-on-One. This is a bi-weekly webinar series where we talk about different topics related to culture, inclusivity, diversity, and belongingness. Today's conversation, universal design for equity. We're going to be talking about applying the principles of universal design to DEI work. My name is Jana Etienne. I am the creator and host of this series. I'm a certified diversity executive, and my work is centered on something that I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. I develop training and workshops, as well as facilitate conversations and programs focused on helping connect mindfulness and self-awareness to daily actions and words. Joining me today is Dr. Jennifer Surrett, founder and director of Disruptive Inclusion. I met Jen earlier this year at the Forum for Workplace Inclusion, and we connected instantly. She did an amazing presentation on this topic, so no pressure, Jen. I'm excited to have you on the series. She has a PhD from Emory University, where she studied ethics, anthropology, and history, but her connection to this work is personal. And if I remember your story, Jen, you learned about autism in high school in a psych class, and fast forward, you did a PhD on the cultural aspects of autism. I'm already sort of intimidated. There's a lot more to that story. Yeah, she's super smart. Lifelong passion for this work. Jen, thank you for joining me.
Ooh, I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much. I believe we're going to start off with a poll.
That is correct. Let's go ahead and launch that.
Great. So this poll is just to kind of assess your familiarity with this concept or this term of universal design. And it'll be up for, I think, about a minute. And when we come back, instead of talking about universal design, I'm going to demonstrate a introductory process that I go through with all of my webinars or talks about access, because inclusion is about access. And so we will talk a little bit about that before getting into universal design once the minute is up.
You know, Jen, I'm glad you said that about inclusion and universal design. I think so often we just hear the words diversity and inclusion as an overarching term for this entire body of work. And equity sometimes gets lost in that. So I'm really excited about that. It's our focus for today. Or sorry, go ahead, Beryl.
No, I was just going to say, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll down in 3, 2, and 1. I'll share the results on screen. Interesting results, 68%. Never heard of it. So I'll turn it back to you.
Great.
We have 1% that's very familiar. So there you go, Jen.
In good company. So before we begin talking about the topic, I always like to give a note on access to demonstrate the access features of this talk, and also to discuss what access features are missing. And I do this in order to highlight the needs of access, obviously. And I also do this so that it makes people more comfortable identifying their own access needs and requesting that in the future. So for today, the access features are the presentation style. So I make slides that are high contrast in terms of black on white writing on black background, or the reverse. I really prefer, obviously, the black background and white writing, using a font that doesn't have serifs. Both of those help people with vision impairments access the slides.
For serif, it's just the little curlies at the end of letters, in case people didn't know that.
Like Times New Roman has that, yeah. In terms of my language and speaking, I do my best to speak slowly and clearly. I know that I get excited and can sometimes talk more quickly. So if that happens, please don't hesitate to jump in the chat and tell me to slow down or to restate anything. I also, if I end up talking about disability, which is my area of expertise, I will use a way of talking about disability that shows, that is called the language of difference and not deficit. So instead of saying that person can't do something, I will, rephrase that in a way that's less negative. I also want to attend to your needs. So if there's any access features that you need, but I also want to invite you all to do whatever you need to do with your bodies or minds to stay attentive and engaged. I'm a fidgeter, so you might see my slinky make an appearance. So sit down, eat, drink, lay down, walk around, whatever you need to do. And then I always like to highlight what's missing from access features because, again, it demonstrates how, as much as we try to make things as accessible as possible, access is aspirational, and there are always things missing. So for today, we don't have, for example, a sign language interpreter. We also don't have subtitles, and this is because we tried to use the subtitles, but for some reason, it wasn't picking up my language.
Right. So just so you can see this, everyone, it's picking me up, but it's not picking up Jen. And so we decided not to use it today.
Right. And so there will be a recording that could be accessed later, and that perhaps we can get some subtitles on, maybe. And so anyways, I encourage you all to do something similar to this as you, whenever you do a public talk or a meeting or a workshop or whatever, just to demonstrate inclusivity and your inclusion goal for the talk. So let's talk about universal design.
Before we do that, Jen, I just want you to notice the purple background on my deck.
I love it.
This was inspired by you because my old presentation slide used to be white, the background. And I noticed personally how I don't need support in terms of vision, but it still was a strain on my eyes. So this is just an example of a little thing all of us can do.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll add, and I will demonstrate this as much as possible throughout, is giving descriptions of any visuals that are up on slide in so much as it's relevant to what we're saying, right? So, I didn't describe the actual icons on the Note on Access slide because I was talking about the feature, and I think the icons weren't incredibly necessary. But if I had an image of something that was accessible, then I would describe that verbally as well.
So can we start with the definition? What
Absolutely.
is, we had 1% very familiar.
So if we could go to slide 9, that we can talk about what universal design is. One above that.
This one.
That one. So universal design is a concept that came out of the disability rights movement in the 80s and 90s. And it was a framework, or it is a framework for architects and other types of public space builders to create spaces that are as accessible as possible to as many people as possible without introducing barriers to anyone. So a really great example of this are curb cuts, which you see here on the screen. And this is the dip between the curb and the road that allows an easy transfer without requiring a step up. And and the one on the slide here also has dots on it that are raised so that people with vision impairments know that they are headed towards the street. And what this does is this, although originally intended for people who use wheelchairs, is helpful for people on bicycles, people with strollers and other kinds of carts, people who are elderly, but it doesn't really introduce barriers to anyone. So it's a really great example as universal design.
You know, it's one of the things that I think is interesting because there's a lot that has followed along this. The raised paint on the ground, I notice it everywhere, not just the dots. I know where I live in Maryland, there are those beep, beep, beep tones. And I don't know what airport it is recently, but I heard an overhead, the moving walkway is about to end. And it told you that, that you were going to stop moving forward. And I'm going to assume there's actually a time reference in there so that if I hear it, I now know when to anticipate that end. So I'm starting to notice these things all over the place. And it helps me if I'm not paying attention that the walkway is about to come to an end.
Yeah, I mean, closed captioning, even though we don't have it, I keep it on my TV all the time because, just it's helpful to have it. I just love having it, and so that's another another tool that was designed for specific disability, but has been adopted by people without that specific disability, and it improves their experience in some way or another. And that's really what universal design is about. If you want to go to slide 18, we have a couple other examples that might be good to
This one?
know, the one with pictures.
I think my numbers are off. If you want to tell me the pretty pictures, I can pull it.
Yeah,
This one.
There it is. Okay, so I would like to describe how these images demonstrate universal design. So if you see the first picture on the top left, it is of a student space, and you see that there is a blue carpet. There's a bunch of different seating options. There is the walls between the seating options are fairly low, and there's a really wide hallway on the outside right that you see on the picture on the right side of the picture. This is a student center space designed for Gallaudet University, which is a university for people who identify as deaf or hard of hearing. And it is designed specifically for that population. And the features that are supportive of this community include that blue background, the paint on the wall that is like a light bluish color. That's chosen specifically because any skin toned hand can be seen well in front of that color.
All skin tones? I'm curious.
What's that?
All skin tones?
The hallway is really wide, and all hallways at Gallaudet are really wide so that people can walk next to each other and talk. And the walls in between each sort of seating area are also low so that people can communicate easily over that. So there's a lot of cool examples. If you go to the Gallaudet website, they have some more information about the design of their classroom.
I actually went to school in DC, and I took a sign language class.
Oh, cool.
And we had a field trip. This was actually a college class, university class. One of the other things I noticed about when I went there is that stadium seating, so to speak, it's in all of the rooms. The lighting is softer, so it's not as harsh on the eye. I will say that was the first time I experienced it without being able to articulate it.
Right.
So that would have been a benefit for me, even though I don't have the challenges with hearing.
Right, exactly. Another thing that we kind of think about as an access feature are ramps, right? So nowadays we see, because of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ramps are required for any building that the public may go into. And a lot of the times these ramps are on the side of the building, maybe even in the back of the building. But if you look at the picture on the upper right side of the screen, you'll see an example.
Red.
Yeah, the red. So it's a white, you're on the second floor of a building, and what you're looking at is this red ramp that goes up in front of a white background. And this is a spinal cord injury facility up in Canada. I cannot remember what it's called right now. But they have a lot of great universal design examples, including this. And this shows us that we can have universally designed spaces that are beautiful, right? A ramp doesn't have to look like an add-on. It can be central to the space. And
or off in the corner somewhere.
Absolutely. Or, like we can have Braille on all restaurant menus. Why not, right? These kinds of things. It doesn't have to be something that you have to ask for. It's just already there. And that's what universal design is about.
So when you think about universal design, then it's the idea of equity in a workplace, in that the organization is providing things in a number of styles and formats, in a number of different, I want to say forms, in a way that whatever you need, you can get. And you don't have to reveal anything. You don't have to ask for some special support or resources and out yourself, if you will, if you have an invisible disability.
Yeah.
A lot of this costs nothing. Okay.
Absolutely.
To be fair, some design like this, it might seem expensive, but if it's designed into the building in the first place,
absolutely,
that's where we can start to see change.
Absolutely. And it's not just for physical spaces. What you're talking about is really designing organizational culture, which is what the application of this architectural framework is for DEI.
Mhm.
I also, just because it's up here on the screen, want to point to the old Cuisinart food processor that if you are my age or older, you may definitely recognize. This was one of the first universally designed products, in that button there that you see that's on, off, or pulse can be pushed with your finger or your elbow or whatever appendage you prefer, because it's nice and big and it allows for errors.
That's interesting because every food processor, most of the food processors I've seen have a similar design. It's almost as if this is the first model, everybody's copying it. I don't know if it was done with that level of intention, but it's proven to be very useful to have that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so if we can go to the next slide, we can look at what the specific principles of universal design are. And again,
Before we do that, Jen, I'm sorry. I don't want to get in trouble from a CPE perspective. How about, Beryl, we go ahead and launch poll question number 2. And while that's open, Jen, you can keep rolling. Beryl will tell us when the poll's about to close.
so yeah, this poll is, maybe a little bit, maybe difficult to answer if you are unfamiliar with universal design, but given that we're thinking about applying this intentional design focus to organizational culture, it might help. So as I noted, our universal design was specifically for building spaces and places, physical access, right? It has been adapted to universal design for learning, for educational access, which you may have come across, and they have modified the principles and added a couple. But by going back to the original 7 principles of universal design applied to building spaces, can kind of help us think about what universal design actually means. And so once the poll is closed, we will have those principles up on the screen, and we can talk about them in terms of what they mean for access, both physically and attitudinally and culturally at workplaces.
You know, Jen, it looks like she opened the other poll. So once that closes, that one's a CPE only poll. So Beryl, you probably can go ahead and close it now and we can
Go ahead
jump
and close
into
it.
the session. Yeah.
Cool. So these are the 7 architectural principles of universal design. The first is equitable use. And this is about making sure that everybody has what they need to access a space when they can, right? And actually, this is the wrong slide.
Is it?
Now that I'm looking at it, it's actually slide 10, the one right below the curb cut slide, because this has additional information that is not applicable to what we're talking about. But
You know,
okay.
folks, this is why when we do these sessions, they're not supposed to be like a linear presentation. So thank you for your
Yeah.
patience.
No. Yes, thank you. Okay, so equitable use. As we know, the term equity is different from equality, because I always say equality is the Oprah model, right? You get a car, you get a car, you get a car. Equity provides people with what they need to get to the same space. So if it is transportation, instead of everybody getting a car, one person may need a bus pass, somebody may need a gas card, somebody may need a bicycle, so on and so forth. So equitable use notes that there are options available, right? That people can access this space no matter what their body or mind is like, right? Flexibility in use supports equitable use in that you can use the stairs or this beautiful ramp or this elevator, right? So there are options. Simple and intuitive use is that it's not complex or overly difficult to understand.
The button on the food processor.
What's that?
The button on the food processor.
The button on, exactly, you know exactly what that button is going to do on the food processor.
Even if you don't, as soon as you do it, you're going to figure it out. It's not
Exactly.
going to harm you and you're going to go, aha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if your kid could figure it out, then you're probably going to be doing okay. Perceptible information. So any information you need to access a space is easily accessible. So one example of this is, the braille that we see at elevators or on bathrooms. Tolerance for error. You don't have to do everything perfect in order for it to work for you. And the last two are really complementary as well. It's low physical effort. You don't have to expend a lot of energy. And that is facilitated by making sure that the size and space that you have is appropriate for approaching and using a particular space or product, right?
Can you go back to tolerance for error? I'm not sure I completely understood that, the way you described it.
So if we think about, for example, the Cuisinart, right? If your hand slips a little bit, you can still push that button, right? Or if we think about, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. That's, actually go to the next slide.
Okay.
We'll have an example.
This one?
Yep. So this is another demonstration of each of the principles. And so if we look at the bottom,
the bottom left, number 5, tolerance for error. It's like an air gun with a nail thing.
Exactly. So it's a lot of protective equipment for a good example of this.
That makes sense.
And so, this is a good slide if you want to take a closer look at it at some later time to kind of understand a little bit more about what each of these principles mean.
Mm-hmm.
And it may seem a little bit different because we're not talking about necessarily physical spaces and physical products. We're talking about intentional design of organizational culture. So, this framework is really about changing your mindset, right? And making it, again, very intentional, very proactive. Diversity, equity, and inclusion so far has been largely reactive. So reacting to the, Equal Opportunity Act, reacting to civil rights movements, reacting to internal complaints. Most recently, it was, DEI, everybody paid attention after the murder of George Floyd, right? And so these moments, people go, oh, it's important for us to attend to this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is imperfect because it's not sustainable and it's not really able to attend to intersectionality, right? It's not really attentive to people who have multiple marginalized identities, right? And so, when we think of, oh, we need to have a racial justice statement, we need to have a women's statement, we need to have an LGBT inclusive statement, that's wonderful, right? But there are people who hold multiple of those identities who may feel like it doesn't really relate to me. And so if you take a universal design approach, what that means is really assessing bits of your organizational culture for potential barriers and fixing them before they become a barrier. And like you were saying before, it dramatically reduces the amount of accommodations that people will then need to request. It cannot totally get rid of all of them, right?
Right.
Again, access is aspirational, but it does absolutely reduce the burden for people to have to go and ask for specific accommodations.
One of the ways I try to frame this work is it's a we problem that we're trying to solve. And historically, if you look back at the history of DEI work as it's evolved, and to some degree still today, it's almost as if the people in the majority are trying to find a way to make the people who are minorities comfortable here.
Right.
Rather than reimagining what this place looks like for all of us.
Yes.
And so I hear what you're saying in the context of culture, because this is about creating spaces, creating policies, expectations for behavior, the language that we use, that kind of thing, that this isn't about political sensitivities and cancel culture, because there is that concern. It's not about what not to say so much as it is about how we say what we say, and it's representative of everyone.
100%. Yeah. And
sense.
how we set up an environment to purposely encourage people to feel safe and thus increase participation.
Without having to do anything or hide anything or pretend to be something. You come as you are, you do as you do, and the things that you need to be comfortable are here.
And without setting up barriers for anybody else. So when we think about that cancel culture, there is division on some DEI principles and movements, and universal design is intentional about not introducing any new problems.
So sorry, go ahead.
I'm done.
Something I observed, it was an office that I went to, beautiful building entrance. You walk in, there's almost like this rotunda. There's this set of escalators that lead you up to this beautiful reception area. The problem is the only way to get to that reception area was either those escalators, and it was one of the escalators where it's only one person at a time. So even if you needed support, you couldn't stand next to somebody. If you had a big bag, it was going to be very awkward. The only way for somebody to get in the building and up to the reception area that needed support would be to go around to the escalators, but the escalators were behind a security wall. So you needed to ask somebody to literally help you get there.
Yeah.
Talk about calling it out. It's one thing to have to go that direction and you just get a different experience. And it's another thing to have to ask somebody to get you there.
Oh, 100%. There are tons of these devices that you roll your chair into and it lifts you up to the floor you need to go into. But most of them have a button that you have to press and sit there and wait for somebody to come and work the machine for you.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's really frustrating. And I'll tell you another story. When I was in college at the University of Georgia, I did an internship with the Council for Disabilities for Athens. And one of the things that I was charged with doing was going around and kind of surveying restaurants for their accessibility. And there was this one particular restaurant where you could not get into the dining area without navigating a few steps. And when we reported this back to the council, they said, oh yeah, we've been fighting with them for a long time. And basically the response of the restaurant owners is, well, we don't need your business. They just,
wow.
I know. And here's the thing about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is no secret ADA committee going out and checking accessibility. In order to get a company to comply to the ADA, when you see breaches of it, you have to submit a report or sue them. And that takes a lot of emotional and financial energy that a lot of people with disabilities just plainly don't have, right? Because they're trying to navigate this inaccessible world. The notion of then, okay, now I got to hire a lawyer. Now I got to make a complaint. It's a big burden.
What I would add to that, and for everyone that's joining us today, I think all of us can reflect back on a moment where it was going to cost you something to ask for something. All right, it's hard enough for many of us to ask for help in the first place, but when you need when you are dependent on somebody else to get you something that is a fundamental need, whatever the case may be, there's an emotional cost to that.
Oh, absolutely.
Layer on to that your your livelihood depends on this,
right,
or your medical care depends on this. I just think that's an opportunity to reflect on.
And
but I want to go ahead.
I just want to say, I don't want to overly focus on disability, even though that's my expertise, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because I think when you hear things like this, and I can even see as you start going through, let me come back to these things on the list. I can see how all of this makes sense from the disability space. And so there's this tendency to say, oh, but this is just disability stuff. This is all about accommodation. How does this tie to culture?
Absolutely. And I've translated them for culture. If you'll go to the slide underneath intersectionality, that's the first one. But I'll say before I go through this, I just want to say that the burden of asking for access, like I said, is not just disability related. If you have a marginalized identity and you are encountering frequent microaggressions, that is an access problem, right? If that is a problem of you feeling comfortable, you cannot access your workspace in a way that is the same as people who are not having those experiences frequently. So that's cultural access.
So you're not talking about a one-off. You're talking about a persistent experience in culture for people who feel marginalized,
right?
On a regular basis.
Absolutely. And that, again, is also emotionally taxing. And then, bringing complaints to HR, confronting somebody who is offensive, all of that stuff, again, is also taxing and not everybody's style of interacting. So if we can just try to prevent them from happening in the first place, it makes things a lot easier. I translated these principles of universal design for DEIB, but I want to note beforehand that it's not an exact translation. And this framework isn't about exactly translating the architectural design for organizational design, but it's about using this framework in order to shift our mindset about what it means to create organizational culture.
I just realized I probably should have pulled these up on the screen, huh?
I was so hoping that you would just automatically do it. So you did it. Perfect.
Okay, good. We did not practice this, folks. Can you tell?
We have lots of discussions, but when we tend to discuss things, we kind of go all over.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, wait a minute, we have to discuss this presentation.
Well, actually, and I think as a reminder to folks, put your questions in the Q&A. We're going to try to take them as we go along. And by the way, Angela mentioned it was the Indianapolis airport that has that announcement at the end of the moving walkway. So thank you, Angela.
Awesome.
I also know that we want to make sure we're pacing our polls right. So Beryl, can we ask the one that asks, how helpful is this approach for your organization's DEI efforts?
That was the last poll that we asked, I believe.
The one that is the one we asked.
Yeah,
Oh.
it sure is.
No, how helpful is your okay. Well, then how about we'll go to the how could universal design help your organization?
All right, let's go ahead and do that one. I will say my answer choices are different than what is on screen.
All right, well, we're taking this off the screen and we're going back to Jen's examples because, we are knocking it out of the park, Jen.
It's all right. I've got a poll launched and live on screen for everyone. I'll let you two continue talking.
Perfect.
So translated for DEIB, we're on the first 4 of these principles.
Yeah. So equitable use, we can think about that applied to how practices, policies, and and environments can be used by a range of identities, right? With people with a range of identities. So are you able to engage in a professional development practice? If you are chronically ill and aren't able to do things outside of work hours, for example, right? Flexibility in use. It's flexible workplace policies and procedures. A biggie here is when it is appropriate to do so, having flexible work hours, flexible work spaces, things like that. Obviously, not every role in society is able to have that kind of flexibility, but there are definitely many that can. And that's helpful for caregivers, right, of young children or elderly parents. It's helpful for people who have conviction histories that need to go to parole meetings, right? So it's helpful for a lot of people. Simple and intuitive use can be translated into making sure that your organization's policies, practices, and communications are super clear and succinct and are not confusing for people, even if English is a second language, right? So that's where I really focus on in that one.
Beryl, sorry to jump in. I'm seeing a couple people saying they're having difficulty answering the poll. Are you seeing those?
I am. If you're having difficulty, I suggest refreshing your screen. It looks like a majority of the audience has been able to vote in, so I'm going to go ahead and close down the poll and turn it back to you.
Great.
Sorry, Jen.
Perfect. No.
Clear and succinct policies, that's where you were.
Yep. So perceptible information is the 4th one. And this is just make sure that everybody in your organization knows where to access information about organizational policies and practices and responsibilities, knows when there's an update, right? It's not hidden in some HR web page that, is difficult to remember where it is. It's an easy access. And if we go to the next slide, we'll do the rest of them.
Would you also say that they are in different formats? So for example, I was attending a neurodiversity conference. It's been the last 2 half days. And one of the gentlemen was talking about technology to help people. So if you have difficulty reading, it's available for somebody to read it to you. So would
Absolutely.
you also recommend then for those policies and procedures? There's a video that you can watch. There's a written guide. There is an audio that you can listen to.
100%. Yeah, I always recommend multiple formats as much as possible for really everything you're doing. So if you're giving a presentation in person, making sure that you have handouts of the presentation, and some of those are in large print. If you have the capability to have Braille, that would be great too. But having videos and audio and written is really important for access for sure.
I'm actually having a guest. We're trying to fit coordinated time, but I'm having a guest who has a number of different tools and strategies and resources that you can use for people who have difficulty hearing. There's a lot of technology out there that many of us aren't aware of because we don't have these needs for these supports, and they cost little to nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of this is just language and transparency. Really.
And awareness. If you don't even think about this, if this is not on your radar, then you're not going to use this in the context of your planning, which is why I think, when you did your presentation, I was just like, aha, this makes sense because it's a framework for me to think more clearly and objectively about the specific thing I'm trying to do rather than trying to troubleshoot an existing policy.
Exactly.
Or reimagine an entire practice. I think that's how I found this to be very helpful for me.
I'm so glad. And it's also helpful to have multiple people involved in the process with multiple identities, because you're not going to be able to predict everything that somebody who doesn't share your particular set of identities needs.
Yeah. That's why representation is so important in all of the work that we do.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we've got 5, 6, 7. Sorry.
5, 6, 7.
And I'm looking at the time. We have about 15 minutes max, plus I do have a couple of questions, so I just want to make sure we cover the good stuff.
Okay, we'll go quickly. Tolerance for error, I really think about this in terms of preventing microaggressions by making sure that people know what microaggressions are and how to respond to them. And that can reduce workplace interpersonal biases. And not just having a one-off training, but having some sort of continuous statement and revisiting of it, because one-off trainings are shown not to really work in the long term. By low physical effort, I translated that into low psychological effort in terms of thinking about psychological safety and everything that you're doing at your organization. And then size and space for approach and use, in terms of shifting that away from a purely physical reference, I think about facilitating the inclusion of all voices and perspectives in workplace practices. So that's a way to think about how to take this physical framework and apply it to organizational culture.
It totally makes sense. Just want to do a quick definition for psychological safety for those who haven't had that training. Psychological safety is the feeling that you can share things about yourself, ask a question, challenge something, push back without fear of reprisal, judgment. There are people who don't want to ask a question in a meeting because they're afraid it'll make them look stupid. And I think we all suffer that to a degree, but I think from a professional perspective, I don't want you to think I'm less competent or less committed. So there are a number of reasons why if the space doesn't create safety, it will shut people down. And so you're talking here, low physical effort, what can we do to help create that culture of psychological safety?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we all know the typical example of there's a boardroom and a woman speaks up and says a good idea and nobody really responds, and then 5 minutes later a man says basically the same thing and everybody's like, oh, Bob, great idea. How do you think that woman is going to respond in the future, right? She probably doesn't feel safe enough to speak up again, even though she has brilliant ideas. And so it does build on itself, and it's like this snowball effect of just leading towards less participation and less psychological safety.
Right. Right. So, I mean, this is a pretty picture that I put this up there, but I'm going to put this slide up here because I think for me, this really does hit all the highlights, if you will.
Yeah, this one describes sort of how that mindset shifts. You know, again, happy to translate the 7 principles, but really it's about encouraging predicting barriers before they become barriers, even for people who might not currently be at your organization.
Yeah.
Helping determine solutions for a range of people and their multiple identities. Integrating inclusion and equity throughout the organization, including in practices and principles and culture, right? And not just having it sort of a separate workshop or series or something, right? Like really putting it at the core. It also communicates that accessibility and inclusion is important and acceptable, right? So again, if you go back to the beginning when I did the note on access, I do that with all my meetings because I want to be sure that people I'm meeting with can feel comfortable saying, actually, I need this in order to fully participate. And they know that that is something that I am okay with hearing and addressing. Help people feel safer and more comfortable. That's that psychological safety. And then supports all of your employees' needs, you know, before maybe even they have the needs. So, yeah.
One of the examples I think that might be helpful for many is that when we all rapidly started working from home and Zooming and Teaming and whatever all of the other video platforms are, that created a form of equity for people that they never had before, because a lot of us have closed captioning that we can privately use. I can turn on closed captioning in a Zoom and nobody else needs to know that I'm doing it.
Right.
If I am neurodiverse and I find light to be distracting or sounds to be distracting, I can manage that in my home where I couldn't manage that in the workplace. And so I think, you know, understanding today that these are things we can put into practice at the office is powerful. And I think we wouldn't have visibility around that or be having the same open conversations about it if it weren't for the horrible COVID that we went through. There are some things we did take away and we learned from it.
And you know, what's interesting about the shift to remote work, you know, a lot of people were, oh, this is so great for people with disabilities. This is so great for the disability community. And it was for most of them. But one of my mentors at Emory University had different limbs. So one of her limbs was shorter and had, I think, 2, maybe 3 fingers, and the other limb was a little bit longer and had 2 fingers. And so typing was really difficult for her. And so being in person was easier for her than being at home. And so again, it just shows that this is aspirational and we're going to make mistakes and there's going to be people who need stuff still, but universal design, again, can help us reduce the need for those requests and communicate to everybody that we care about you being able to show up and be your person and participate and be valued.
Without having to ask for things that are special. And I think the challenge there is that a lot of organizations say, we have resources, if you need them, just ask for them.
Exactly.
But there are a lot of reasons people won't ask for those resources. And
exactly.
the people who don't necessarily need them, I think you talked about closed captioning earlier on. I don't want to cite the statistic, but I was just on a conference this morning and the gentleman said that that closed captioning is the #1 most widely used tool that, I don't know about you, but I turn on closed captioning just to watch television.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, if you don't have closed captioning, one of the tools that somebody said to me is that you open your iPhone, you open Notes and you turn on the record function, and it's picking up all of the words and you can follow along. And this one person, and it's the woman who I'm inviting on the webinar, she was saying that she would do that. So she's found a workaround or a hack because in places where those tools weren't available, if you're at the movies and you're having difficulty. It's just fascinating. And as soon as somebody shares a story that way, I immediately realize how I've taken something for granted or didn't even know that that was a challenge in the first place. Because if I've not experienced it, I don't know how to solve a problem that I've never had to walk through myself.
Absolutely. And that's why we need to constantly learn about people who are different from us, right? Learn about people with disabilities, learn about, people of color, learn about people, who experience incarceration, and what's really important about that is if when you want to learn about a community, you have to seek out resources created by that community. There's a ton of stuff written about, the experience of disability from professionals, right? From doctors or psychologists or whatever. But that's not going to give you any information on what it's like to live with these disabilities, right? So you have to seek out resources created by communities.
Right.
And then again, have the diversity on the, But another reason why people may not want to request for resources when you were talking about that general statement, we have resources, just request them. A lot of people don't think they're eligible for them, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Because they'll then, for example, a caretaker, like I need to leave at 3 o'clock to go pick up my kid from school. I don't feel like I can request flexible work hours because I don't have a disability, right? Or whatever the case may be. Or simply, I am a night owl and I don't like to get up. I do not do well between the hours of 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. And so I would like to work after that, right? I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why people may want to request resources, but don't feel like they hold the identity required to get them.
Yeah, I think that, so a couple questions. I want to get to them. We'll have about 5 minutes. There aren't a lot of them. But what you just reminded me of is we had this push to get rooms for nursing mothers. And what we've since learned, the rising tide lifts all ships, the curb cut effect. What we've learned is that those rooms can be used for so many things. They can be used for people of different religions and cultures to go in and practice their religion privately. They are rooms that people can go to where they are doing some kind of a mindfulness moment. They are rooms that people can go to. I know for me, I have an invisible disability. I have epilepsy, and I will tell you how much I would have appreciated having those rooms when I was having a seizure, because the seizures that I have aren't seizures that are visible to other people, but I'm feeling incredibly conspicuous and would prefer to go and hide, that kind of thing. So there are all kinds of reasons, and you have a room like this, and come to find out it serves so many people. Somebody's feeling nauseous and they just want to get away.
Somebody's having a panic attack.
Who wants to go sit in the bathroom? So, all right, some questions. Well, this first one's a comment. Just so you know, the processor design is a company preference, not a universal preference. Sometimes it is distinguished one company from another, or to distinguish a high-end product from a low-end product. So just sharing that. Somebody said, file an ADA claim with the local DOJ Civil Rights Division office on that restaurant. I see a lot of ADA suits and settlements in, I believe this is a city, but I'm not going to try to read that. But that's something that, who would do that? I mean, I'm not going to take that on.
The ADA is limited, right? Universal design is sort of the next step in it. And I'll tell you, I recently submitted an ADA claim because we were coming back from a trip and my husband was in the middle of chemo, and the line to get to the parking lot, to get the shuttle to the parking lot, was like 3 hours long. And so I called to try to get disability transportation because he can't, at that time, he couldn't stand very well. And I got cut off and sent to other people. And eventually I had to go to the front of the line and just ask if we could cut. And of course, lovely people allowed us to cut. And so I filed a federal ADA complaint, and I filed one with the airport. And I have not heard from the federal ADA.
But that's also something I would have never thought to do.
Yeah.
So the next one,
to prepare.
Say that, I missed it.
I did hear from the airport.
Oh, well, that was good. Yeah. An elevator is not designed for everyone, and people don't use any common sense. They just try to fit as many people as they can on it. At a conference with a girl had partial vision that Okay, I'm trying to read. A conference with a girl who separated her from her dog because they just kept piling in and pushing her dog further and further back. What about people who are claustrophobic and elevators are terrifying? So this is, thank you, Nicole, for just sharing some other examples of how something might be well intended, but it also has consequences if we're not being thoughtful and thinking about it.
It also demonstrates the need for, again, multiple options. So
Yes.
if you're claustrophobic, maybe there is an escalator. If you have difficulty navigating stairs.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And ideally not in the back of the office, somewhere in that you have to go around the back. Because I've had to do that once or twice. I don't remember my situations, but I do want to acknowledge Kristen asked question about examples for ways when receiving microaggression comments in the workplace. And I will say to Kristen, that's not there's no way we could cover that in this webcast. You are welcome to reach out to me. I have a couple of resources on that. I believe there's also a webinar archive. You won't get CPE, but it's there. I did one on microaggressions if you want to look for that. Jen, we are like at the end, and this felt like we were talking for 3 minutes. So
Run through
any last thoughts before we move to the actual official wrap up and final poll?
Should we run through the example real quick?
We probably don't have time. I'm sorry. Which ones are you talking about?
The equal opportunity.
Oh yeah, I wish we could. We don't have time. I was so excited about that too. I'm sorry, folks. Maybe we could do something else. But thank you, Jen, for joining me. So many things that I've learned from you, and I hope everybody was able to take something else away that they could apply to their organization. Just one thing, that would be the goal. I want to remind everybody that this is a bi-weekly webinar series. Next, 2 weeks from now, November 3rd, I'm actually rebroadcasting this session from back in April with Dr. Carlotta Roman about the importance of leveraging change management, because even like the session today, in order for organizations to start moving in that direction, we need to have the mindset of change. Do you want to go ahead and open that last poll, Beryl, while we're wrapping up, since there's no need to share the results on that one? It's just.
I sure can. Yep, it's open on screen.
The registration for this event is open and available. Scan the QR code, or it's right there on the CPA Academy web page. So Jen, final thoughts? We got what, 45 seconds? You want to share some brilliant thought?
Well, I just thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to share this framework. I personally, I mean, I'm biased, but I think that it's really helpful. And I really like introducing it to people. And I also want to invite anybody who's interested in learning more or has questions that you didn't get to today or come at you later, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to me through my website, which again is Disruptive Inclusion. My email is jen@disruptiveinclusion.com. So either of those are good ways to get in contact with me, and I'm always excited to talk about this. If your organization wants workshop on this approach, happy to do that. So yeah, just reach out and let me know how I can help and answer questions and spread more information.
Jen, thank you so much for joining me. I have the slide up here just to remind everybody that you actually can come in and actually provide the program that I got to sit through and actually hear more about that example, because it was really helpful to see a tangible difference between what we're currently doing and used to and to what we could do. So thank you. Thank you for joining me.